I would like to introduce Brian Winkler, Senior Federal Solutions Engineer, and John Wood, Director, Incident Response. Brian, are you ready to kick it off?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shirley. I'd like to thank everybody who was able to join today, all our registrants. And, you know, we really have been looking forward to this, an opportunity to make sure that people understand the relevancy of and the importance of not only what Cylance offers, but also, you know, what's most important to government agencies today, what we hear typically from the field. To introduce myself, I have a humble Bachelor of Science degree that I've been able to parlay and use in my field basically the last 20 plus years in IT, telecom, and cybersecurity. And really for the last 13 years, working on federal programs, both as a contractor, but also as a consultant, and of course now as a solutions architect here at Cylance. Worked on some programs that I'm pretty proud of, but what I'm really excited to introduce you know, today, or whom I'm excited to introduce you to, is John Wood. And John, before you know, I have to kick your session off here, I want to give folks just a moment to take a look at your resume, which I find to be pretty impressive. You're really the boots on the ground. You've been on the front lines here for a number of years, and just, you know, a couple of things that stick out. Obviously, besides just, you know, your credentials, are the fact that you work on some cases that affect us all. You know, whether we're in government, we're in public or private sector, just the everyday user. These are all important cases and things we've seen in the headlines. And so I'm excited to you know, bring that experience to bear on you know, our topic today. So, and anything you want to touch on has been particularly, you know, exciting for you, please feel free to do that.
No, you know, mostly everything I've worked on is predominantly classified, so a lot of it I can't give a ton of detail on, but I've been very fortunate to have worked on a lot of great cases. I've been put in that great position to be able to see lots of different things. You know, I was the lead forensic examiner on the Snowden case, did all the incident response out in Hawaii on that, worked on the Petraeus, of course, the 9/11 attacks, pretty much the whole country worked on that one. I worked also on the Ardit Farizi ISIS case. That's out on Google if you have an interest in that, as well as the Michael Kadar case, the Russian voter intrusion case, as the press dubs it. Also worked on that. Clearly, I can't talk too much about that either, unfortunately. But I've also done a lot of APT group stuff, 28, 29, 10, 1. I've done incident response in several of those national security cases at a lot of government agencies, the White House, State Department, and both houses of Congress.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, John. And we're really excited to have John join BlackBerry Cylance and really put all that experience to work, both you know, in government and also as well for the commercial and private sector. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to discuss, just in brief, some of the cybersecurity realities and really what our government agencies in particular are facing. And this is, a lot of this comes from the field, and, you know, basically our conversations, as well as from, you know, real experience when we put the technology and the services to work, solving these problems. And what is the feedback that we hear? Additionally, we'll have an interview with John, just to make this more conversational and interactive, and then, you know, challenge really all, not just our listeners, but all government agencies and entities to rethink cybersecurity in a way that hopefully will make a big difference for them. We'll also open up for Q&A at the end. So, all right, John, you want to take this away?
Sure. So one of the challenges that we see out there, right, in the world is there's so much malware, right? Malware is still being used, even though we have lots of other fileless techniques and things like that. Malware is still out there, and the scope of this, 40,000 new malicious binaries created every hour. And this is probably an old stat now. You know, 5 malware events per second, that's incredibly, I mean, traditional AV, just, you know, a hash-based AV is just not going to cut it. It doesn't scale the way it needs to. So one of the things that we've studied is how much is malware used in cyber attacks, right? And we've seen over 90% use, and when I say malware, I'm talking about executables, actual executables or DLLs, portable executable files, that are used in more than 90%, right? That's significant because there's a whole lot of attention that gets put to, you know, things like fileless attacks, but malware is still being used a lot. And they're creating huge numbers of malwares. They're mutating now. You know, look at some of the automated stuff, Emotet, you know, it mutates every time it installs, right? So hashing just doesn't work. And that's, like I said before, it's making traditional AV completely useless, right? It's just not feasible. You can't keep up with that, the tracking of the hashes. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's really relevant, John. I appreciate you sharing that because it's easy for us who are, you know, as security practitioners to make that case that, you know, you absolutely need to provide a pre-execution defense, and you need to be addressing things early in the kill chain, you know, using different approaches, you know, in contrast to the legacy approaches that have been essentially ineffective. But to hear that from an incident responder, it really is responsible for, you know, cleaning up that mess and tracking all of that. It's you know, it's absolutely critical. So these are some of the things that we hear, you know, in my conversations with government agencies, both customers and prospects, that really are the takeaways. Right? If there are three categories, if I can kind of break this down, we hear when we ask them about, you know, your endpoint solutions, your ability to actually protect the crown jewels in your infrastructure, and what the tools they're using today, not to mention, you know, the O&M that goes along with that. Mission impacts, obviously. I mean, that's one of the biggest things. Whether you know, your mission's protecting soldiers out on the field and enabling their mission, or it's, you know, doing research, cancer research, you know, all that data that's out there needs to be protected. Obviously, you know, the user themselves needs to be enabled. And we hear that a lot of the tools that are out there are not only largely ineffective, but they're adversely impacting operations. We also hear, unfortunately, from, you know, your security practitioners and the SOC, the incident response team, you know, the frontliners, the window watchers, everybody out there is dealing with excessive amounts of alerts, right? Here we are years later after introducing endpoint detection and response and forensics tools, and throwing more and more people at the problem. They're still dealing with an excessive amount of alerts. And, you know, obviously, you know, this is where we're going to plug for artificial intelligence and other automation techniques that are going to give you back a defender's advantage. But additionally, we hear there are too many tools, and there's a lot of noise in the market. And so what we're the business problem that we're continually having to address is tool consolidation and optimization, and then making sure that these solutions actually work, right? So next I want to go into an interview with John, and we're going to make this a little more conversational. Again, we don't want to just narrowly focus on what we have on the agenda today, but we're going to start this off with just a few questions that, John, I'd like to start with, and then we'll eventually get to a Q&A session for the audience as well. So John, like I said, I got to say, I've only just known you briefly, but taking a deeper look at your resume and having, you know, seen all these different campaigns and these operations and investigations that have had to take place, your resume is very impressive to me. I'm sure it is to many of our listeners. And, with all that's gone on and all the experience that you've gleaned, I imagine it must have been hard to leave the FBI, and of course, you know, understand the importance of these things and the difference you're making. I mean, you've even probably had opportunities, I'm sure, to worked for other vendors or solution providers, but you didn't. Even some who claim to have all the answers. What do you attribute to your departure, and why did you come to BlackBerry Cylance?
Well, just like everything, I'm a little restless, and I'm trying to get into the next thing, trying to learn the next thing, stuff like that. And, 23 years with the FBI was enough. I enjoyed my time there, but, everything comes to a close. And in doing research about Cylance, I was very impressed with the tools. And as have been working for Cylance, I've been even more impressed because I have an even deeper understanding of what the tools do. They're fantastic, and quite frankly, I wish I had some of these during some of the incidents that I dealt with, that I conducted IR on. They would have been extremely helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, just this morning, I was able to participate in a government CIO forum here in Arlington, Virginia, where one of your former colleagues, John McClure, was speaking to just that, and just how some of the breaches that he was subjected to by some of our enemies who really, from other nations, could have been prevented. And that's, it's a bittersweet truth, but the fact is that we know a lot more now, right? So you worked on a lot of APT work, and really, you've alluded to this a little bit, just kind of, how these tools would have likely helped. How also could BlackBerry Cylance have assisted, not only from a product standpoint, but really, from an IR incident response standpoint?
Sure. So we'll take this from a product perspective. So the product really helps a lot because obviously AI is a lot more functional than hash-based AV. I mean, that's just the reality. It does a great job, and there's a couple slides that actually exemplify it here in the future, so I won't get too much into that. But it has some features that are outstanding. In the end, hackers do what they do, right? They've been doing the same things for 1 decade, 2 decades, something like that. The MITRE framework is still a really good, the kill chain, all of that. It still applies. So, an attacker gets an initial foothold, using some method, then they entrench themselves, they compromise credentials, they do lateral movement, and then they gather up stuff and exfil, right? So it's still the same methodology. Things have changed a little bit, and it's done a little bit different. We have upgrades in technology and such, but the techniques are still the same. That flow is still the same. So, for instance, one of the things that we see a lot, obviously, is Mimikatz being run in some format, to escalate privileges. They always want to get domain admin so they can do anything anywhere on the domain. So what Protect and Optics do is there's a feature that can either block that through Protect if it's an executable. And then the other way is, Mimikatz is run a lot of different ways. It can be run as PowerCats as well through a PowerShell. PowerShell is an extremely powerful on-the-box solution that is on every Windows install. So attackers love to live off the land. We have a feature in Protect that can monitor and either alert to any suspicious PowerShell or any PowerShell activity at all, or we can take certain actions. If we see a specific type of PowerShell activity, like for instance, it has calls a specific DLL or any type of something that we specify, it does something that we specify, we can have it blocked, we can have it alerted, we can have the process killed, we can have the user logged off, we can take all kinds of actions for these things so that they can't advance their entrenchment into the workstation or the network. So those are really helpful. We also have the memory protections. Again, one of the things that they love to do, process injection is still out there. It's still being used. Process hollowing. Anything that's suspicious in running in process gets flagged. And again, we can take different actions, the same actions as with the PowerShell scripts. LSAS reads. Mimikatz also does LSAS reads. That's how it functions to compromise the plain text credentials out of memory. Well, we protect from that. We can either alert or, again, take some action, block it or log off the user or whatever it tends to be. So we kind of break that kill chain. Lateral movement is a big deal, and that's where that starts. That lateral movement always starts with compromising credentials because they love, again, to live off the land. So they love RDP and things like that. So that's where the noisiest when they're in your network. That's where your best chance of catching them is. Obviously, we would love to stop them before that, but the tools do a great job of that.
Right. No, that's something I'm really burdened with daily is educating the market that is really focused on really post-execution forensics and either manual or semi-automated detection response. How could this have been prevented? And obviously, a lot of that comes down to our controls and governance, but there's also technology that's there to provide a defender's advantage. And I guess at the risk of this sounding too much like a pitch, I want to shift gears for a second and move away from that and ask the question: with your experience, the 23 years you spent in the FBI working on these high-profile investigations, I'm sure you learned a lot. And I know you can only talk about so much, right? A lot of these things are not public information. But are there any that are more public that you could at least make some reference to? And how could you positively have impacted things at that point had you been enabled with these tools? But also moving forward, just in general, what's going to be most important, and what's one nugget of truth that you can leave us with over the next 23 years to really be prepared?
Well, one of the things that I'm a true believer in is the old things are still they still work. The security methods, right? Everybody understands layered security, right? One tool doesn't fix everything. There's no panacea out there. You have to understand your tool, what the strengths are and what the weaknesses are, and you have to have a layered approach. Don't think that if you put Cylance Protect on there, it's going to be a panacea, right? What it does very well, but it doesn't do everything. You still need to have all of those other defenses that everybody knows about in the layered system, right? You need network visibility, firewalling, everything else as a part of that. So I think, we won't even talk about, advances in computing, because that's probably going to, everybody wants to talk about quantum computing and may change things, but who knows if it's ever going to even come? We know it's out there, but who knows at what point it's going to be. That will be a game changer, and I don't know that anybody can predict what's going to happen at that point. But still, the same things that have worked in the past still work in the present.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really still a reactive game. We're trying to change that shift. Again, sounds not a silver bullet, but how do you think we're making a difference in terms of covering our part of the attack surface? And are there any examples you have of that? Cases you've worked on, we can't talk much about, but what we can say is that in a lot of cases, just as you started out saying, John, whether it's 90%, I don't know if that's an exact number, but a large number of these breaches start with malicious code. And if we can prevent execution, then we increase the control friction. And we can largely, I think we can say with confidence that over 99% of these attacks would be averted. And then we can focus on those more advanced things, right, with our tools and expertise. I've heard one of our practitioners basically refer to it as, rather than looking for a needle in a haystack, we're now looking for a needle in a matchbox, right? Able to really zero in on those things that matter and reduce the noise. But what we're trying to say here, sort of in summary, bringing this home, is prevention is possible. And we have to have a paradigm shift in the industry, enable AI, those products and services that are AI driven. We give our agencies and institutes, as well as those in the private sector, a defender's advantage using AI-driven tools and resources, and really focus in on pre-execution prevention as much as possible, so that we can get back the ability that we have to not just be reactive and behind the curve, but really be ahead of the attackers. I think that really is conveyed well in the next couple of slides. So here we talk about a pathway to prevention. Don, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Sure. Yeah. So this is kind of the way I look at IR, traditional IR, versus the way that Cylance specifically does IR, because we obviously use our tools. So, you get into a network, you start looking for IOCs, you find an IOC, you send out some type of monitoring device to find those IOCs, and you kind of react based on that. Well, the way that we do things is it's a lot more helpful. Whenever you're doing an IR, obviously you don't want to try to expel a threat actor before you've fully scoped what exactly they're doing and what they're exactly capable of. Otherwise, you don't really expel them. And we've had issues like that before, where you're playing whack-a-mole. We had that in State Department years ago, where it's just very difficult for a lot of reasons. It's a very large network, a very large attack surface, and it's not homogeneous. This is very difficult. So what the use of our tools does for us, and what it allows us to do, is it sits on the endpoint and it gives us this layer of protection while we're scoping what the attacker is doing. So we can set some of those protections to monitor. So the attacker is on there, we know they're on there, and we know what they're doing, but we're not letting on to the fact that we know what they're doing. And that gives us time to fully scope the incident before we try to expel them, right? If we try to kick them out, they're just going to use other methodologies, right? So we definitely don't want that. And in the end, it's about making your network as hard as possible. Make it so hard to do things that they won't be able to, it's just too much effort for them to stick around. It's kind of the same principle as locking your car doors or your house doors, right? The burglar comes along and he tries car doors, and if anything is open, he goes on in and grabs well, you want to make that lock as strong as possible, and you want to have an alarm, and all of these other things, maybe a fence around your house or put it in your garage or whatever. You want to have all that layered approach. So we do that in our IRs. Okay.
Yeah, I've often heard of basically the way that we do incident response is, again, pathway to prevention, because we're not just leaving behind a report, right? We're actually providing them not just recommendations, but actual containment, using Cylance Protect and Cylance Optics. And once the attacker is extradited, there's a pathway forward to prevent that moving forward, right?
That's correct.
So we've been talking about AI, which is, again, the term that gets thrown around a lot. Unfortunately, it's become too commonplace to hear it. But John, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what that means, and what is this term predictive advantage?
So this to me is extremely compelling, and this is what sold me on it when I saw this and when I saw the test results. So what Cylance does is they take their old models and they test against modern day malware, and not just generic Zeus or whatever. They're looking at some pretty nasty stuff. All of the mutating malwares, Petya, non-Petya. Our math models that were 21 months old when Petya, non-Petya first hit would have predicted Petya, non-Petya. That's an example up there, right? Zcryptor, our 6-month-old model, would have predicted it. 6 months before it ever existed, it would have predicted it. That's pretty compelling when you think about it. because these didn't even exist in our math models were seeing it. So to me, that's kind of the proof in the pudding kind of thing. And it's very compelling. It's very compelling.
Well, and not only predictive, but preventative, right? There's a lot of solutions that are focused on sort of collecting the data, aggregating it, sifting through it, and then making some kind of a prediction. But to make it actionable and pre-execution, that's another story, right? So again, we basically talked about essentially some of the cybersecurity realities, challenges that government agencies and institutions are facing. In summary, what are the benefits here? What I like to essentially refer to as our ESP, or instead of what ESP is commonly referencing, which would be extrasensory perception. Think of it in another way as being predictive, right? Our technology is being predictive and having a cognition about it that's able to evaluate malicious binary or attack before it happens, and then effectively neuter it, quarantine it, pre-execution, prevent it from ever executing. So that's the effectiveness. That's the first column, the E and the ESP. And this is really what we hear, again, from our customers and our prospects over and over again, is that they just had no idea what they were missing. Using legacy antivirus and even other EDR tools, they may have a whole stack of more reactive technologies, and yet they deploy Cylance Protect, and they find that they're now preventing threats they never knew about. They're getting the visibility, and they're actually preventing them. Simplicity is the second column. The ease of management. Once we deploy baseline inside of an environment, we're essentially saying it's not a complete set it and forget it, but again, because we're preventing these things, your practitioners, your analysts, your incident responders, they're shifting their attention in a different way. It's more an after action report where we're saying, hey, we blocked this, and here's what it would have done had we not had Cylance in place. And then eventually, what we hear is, as they deploy, is also this is the performance gains. We just deployed, this is a recent story, just deployed to a government agency with nearly 100,000 endpoints. Currently, they're at 65,000 endpoints deployed and moving. And what they told us is that after replacing their legacy antivirus with Cylance Protect, they saw a gain of network bandwidth gain of 2/3. So basically, Cylance was about 1/3 of the network traffic that their legacy antivirus introduced on the network. And so they sent us statistics on that. And obviously, that's not just network bandwidth. It's CPU, it's memory, it's disk I/O, it's the longevity of your fleet life. So this is one of the things. It's really, for me as a security practitioner, it may seem tertiary, but to them, it's huge, right? Because it means an ROI, and it means the ability to really get back to things that they want to get back to, right? And being proactive, working on projects that were on the backlog. Okay, so basically in summary, we talked a lot about the security realities. We talked about John's experience, and we talked about how Cylance can help. Just a quick plug for any of those who aren't aware of what Cylance offers. We offer a Cylance Protect as our flagship AI-driven product that is based on machine learning, algorithmic science, predictive and preventative approach to replacing antivirus, and again, getting back a defender's advantage. Cylance Optics also augments what Cylance Protect does as part of the same agent and same console. Optics provides basically intelligent response. They're more based on context rather than just content. So, think of this more as, not just external, but even insider threat use cases. And then Cylance Guard, we recently announced the addition of Cylance Guard as really our own sort of, service offering to not just deploy and operationalize these products, but in an ongoing way, so on a subscription basis, basically provide 24/7 support and world-class, basically incident containment and response. So that it's an ongoing monitoring, proactive monitoring and response program that we can offer for customers that use our products. In terms of how this is deployed, our architectural options, unlike some of the next-gen solutions that are out there, we can not only deploy from the cloud and offer a FedRAMP solution, also have a hybrid, sort of a smart proxy or edge cache proxy solution, provides additional protection as well as optimization of bandwidth at the gateway, was larger and even like low bandwidth environments. And then for air-gapped environments, we actually offer an on-premise deployment and management solution. So for those government agencies that the Department of Defense and the IC have classified environments, tactical environments cannot connect to the internet, we do provide a means by which to manage the endpoint that, again, provides an ongoing advantage. There's no need for constant signature updates. We update the agent about quarterly, so we don't have to worry about daily DAT files and signature updates. And you're protected with very little decay in the model for long periods of time at a rate of better than 99%. So really unprecedented protection and now enclave level protection and management. That's basically it in terms of our presentation today. We want to be able to offer you guys some resources and next steps, and then open it up for Q&A. Essentially, what I want to make sure that all our listeners are aware of is the fact that Cylance is both a products and services company focused on cybersecurity, always AI enabled and driven at the core of all our technology. And if you want to connect with us, you can basically reach out to dlfederalsales@cylance.com or reach out to me directly. And there are some others here who also cover the federal sector, including Dan Sweeney, Robert Greenfield, of course, John Wood, our Director of Incident Response, and James Zabriskie, Federal Business Development Representative. So we do invite you to reach out to us if you're interested in a free demo or even proof of concept. Not to mention the fact that the incident response and containment services that we've been referencing are readily available. Often if there's a breach already underway, we can be responsive within a day, if not hours, to assist whether remotely or on site. So here's a little bit about that. Some of the resources I want to make sure everybody knows about that are available. We have government-focused case studies, white papers, and podcasts available on our website. And this presentation will be available for all our participants who will be disseminated. We also have different deployment options available. We can go more into that. Incident containment, as I mentioned, and other consulting services focused on security as well. I also want to make a mention of some great examples of what we've been talking about, where we either prevented or could have prevented these really high-profile and advanced attacks. Operation Shaheen, which was something that we, Cylance, our security team, discovered, tracked, and responded to, which was really a orchestrated attack against the Pakistani government. And then the OPM breach, which many are familiar with, where Cylance was the incident response team and then also the containment team.
I did see a couple of questions. One was whether we were going to protect for IoT devices and smartphones. And of course, that is definitely on the roadmap. That's probably a big reason why BlackBerry bought us, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Those efforts are underway to protect the 150 million automobiles and other IoT devices that are out there. Increasingly, that number is going up, and we want to make sure that we have that level of pre-execution prevention for those devices. Not to mention mobile devices when that development is underway as well.
So there was another question about, stand by, let me find it. We have a bunch of questions here that we'll try to get to. So someone asked about credentials. Is there any way to determine if someone's using credentials, compromised credentials? So there's not a way to determine if someone is using compromised credentials. What we do is we try to stop them from compromising the credentials in the first place. So if someone is using, you know, X account and has the password to it and they're laterally moving, well, there's no way to determine whether, who is that? Is that the actual account holder or is that someone else? Well, there's no way to determine that to my knowledge. I know Guard is working on profiling and stuff like that, which is really interesting stuff. But in general, we try to knock that off right off the bat, right? We don't even want those credentials to be compromised. So we have the ability to block the LSAS reads so that they can't get that. I talked about Mimikatz earlier, but there's also other tools out there as well, proc dump and things like that that I've seen in IRs that we can block as well, so that they don't even get that opportunity.
All right, I saw thanks, appreciate that, John. I saw another question related to FedRAMP, and someone asked, when will Cylance Optics and Cylance Guard get the FedRAMP ATO? Also for Persona, what is Cocoon? Okay, great questions. Cylance Optics is actually today already FedRAMP certified. So if you purchase the Cylance Protect suite, or if you're already a customer, then you are covered under FedRAMP ATO. We have achieved that 2 years ago, and actually Optics is part of that same FISMA boundary. It is covered, and we do have FedRAMP ATO. So for Guard, that is forthcoming, but we do plan on putting that through the same process. And then also for Cocoon, that's actually more of an internal phrase. What this person's asking about is our upcoming new release of our enterprise platform, which will essentially provide not only Cylance Protect and Optics, but also a new product called Persona in one unified agent, all managed from one cloud-based console. And Persona will basically change the game for continuous identity verification. You're leveraging AI to continuously authenticate the user. So that is actually coming in the next few months. So we're actually already in the initial stages beginning to release Persona. I'm very excited about that. How does Cylance assist in identifying compromised credentials? And how are you alerted on this type of event?
Yeah, we just answered that one just a minute ago. That again,
Okay.
That's actually preventing it is really the answer.
Yep. And then we do address that also in our compromise assessments, where we can go out and determine have you been compromised in the past, and then part of that includes lateral movement, data exfiltration, and compromised credentials as well. Is there a way to migrate from cloud to hybrid mode? Yes. That would be a longer conversation, but absolutely. It's very possible to, if you're using the cloud today and you want to introduce hybrid, that's just something that we can help you explore on your own, or even better, we have a service called Threat Zero. I highly recommend. Again, we're really a solution. We see ourselves at least as a solutions company, not just a software company. We don't just want to toss software over the fence, but actually help you deploy it, optimize it, and in a continuing way make sure that you're protected. That's where Threat Zero comes in.
So there's a question about integrating Cylance with the BlackBerry UEM. Again, we had talked about that a little bit ago, that BlackBerry does want to use our AI technology. Now, how we do it is, that's up to the developers, and that's beyond what we see. I don't know if they're going to integrate or if they're going to actually rebuild from scratch. I'm not really sure, but there are definitely plans to add the AI technology into smartphones as well as IoT devices. Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming out today.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. Thanks for coming and attending this Again, you know, this presentation will be available for all attendees. Feel free to use and disseminate that at your discretion, and to follow up and request follow up for any of the needs that we've discussed today. It's been our pleasure, and thank you, and we look forward to future conversations.